Thanks for tuning into Cheating Confessions. Don't miss the jaw-dropping conclusion. I invited Ryan into my house, and a few minutes later, he took out the tool he had brought. I was surprised by its size. I had never seen anything like it before. I am Jennifer, a 44-year-old woman, quiet by nature, with homely habits. I've always enjoyed the serenity that my daily life provides. My family and I live in Portland, Oregon, a city known for its beautiful parks and peaceful atmosphere, and it perfectly suits my quiet, structured life. But today, I feel compelled to share something that has profoundly changed my perspective, something that happened on an ordinary day, but took a surprising and unexpected turn. I need to tell this story, and I hope you listen to me without judgment. What I'm about to say may sound unusual, but please remember, I am only human, subject to emotions and moments of weakness. It was a warm, sunny morning, and as usual, I was at home doing my household chores, the usual routine: sweeping, tidying, organizing, cleaning. With my husband, Brian, age 46, at work and my children at school, I take advantage of these quiet moments to immerse myself in the rhythm of the tasks. The empty house feels like a sanctuary where I can lose myself in music, letting it guide me through my chores. Music always helps me tune out the world, and it's almost like therapy for me. That particular morning, the music echoed through every corner of the house, and I was so absorbed in the task that I didn't even hear the doorbell. I was still in my comfortable cleaning clothes, lost in the melody. The sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the floor as I swept, completely unaware that my husband's friend, Ryan, had come by to return the lawnmower he had borrowed. Ryan had called me a few times, but since I hadn't answered, he decided to come by in person. After ringing the doorbell a few more times and still getting no response, Ryan figured it would be best to leave the lawnmower in the backyard. As he walked around to the side of the house, he passed by the living room window and saw me dancing and cleaning, completely oblivious to his presence. What happened next is something I still find unsettling when I think about it. Ryan stood there watching me for a few moments. He seemed fascinated, perhaps even surprised, by what he saw: a woman, normally reserved and quiet, moving freely to the music, her hair loose, with no care for the outside world. I wasn't aware that someone could be watching, and that gave me a sense of freedom I rarely indulged in. Ryan remained by the window, observing me for what must have been longer than I realized. Eventually, I turned and saw him standing there, his face partially obscured by the reflection of sunlight in the window. My heart skipped a beat, and a rush of adrenaline surged through my body. Instinctively, I clutched the front of my shirt, as if that simple gesture could somehow hide the vulnerability of the moment. I quickly threw on a robe over my casual outfit, feeling exposed, despite not wearing anything revealing. I still felt vulnerable, like he had witnessed something intimate that wasn't meant to be shared. Trying to regain composure, I stepped outside to the backyard, where Ryan stood next to the lawnmower. "Ryan, what were you doing at the window?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but my voice betrayed the discomfort I felt. He smiled awkwardly and explained that he had come to return the lawnmower and, after not getting an answer at the door, was just about to leave it in the yard. He said he had noticed movement inside the house and thought he'd make sure everything was fine, maybe even an intruder, which is why he stopped to watch. Although his explanation made sense, there was something about the way he looked at me that left me unsettled. His smile lingered a little too long, and the moment stretched in a way that felt heavy. I tried to make a joke to lighten the tension. "Well, you looked more like a burglar, spying on me through the window," I said with a forced laugh. Ryan chuckled, but it was a nervous laugh, and I could tell he was trying to ease the awkwardness just as much as I was. He suggested we get a drink to cool off, mentioning how stifling the heat was. Unsure of what else to do, I agreed and invited him inside. Inside, I offered him a glass of iced tea, and Ryan sat down on the couch. He still had that slightly disconcerting smile on his face, the kind that made me feel both curious and uneasy at the same time. As he sipped his drink, he commented on how relaxed and carefree I had seemed while dancing. He said it was so different from the image he had of me, always calm, quiet, almost distant. His words caught me off guard, and I admit, I felt a little flattered. It had been a long time since anyone outside of my family had paid me that kind of attention. Ryan was my husband's close friend, someone I had always seen as just that, a friend of my husband, not someone who would ever notice me in this way. Ryan hesitated for a moment, as if unsure whether he should continue. "I've known you for years, Jen," he said, using the nickname only my husband and closest friends called me. "But I've never seen you like this before, so, alive." I felt my cheeks flush, and I tried to laugh it off, saying he was reading too much into it. "It was just a normal day for me," I replied, hoping to end the conversation there. But Ryan didn't let it go. "No, there was something about today. The way you moved, the way you let go. It was like you were a different person." "It was captivating," he said, his eyes locking onto mine in a way that made me feel vulnerable again. I knew I should steer the conversation in a different direction, but part of me was intrigued by what he was saying. It was a side of myself I hadn't thought about in a long time, being seen as more than just a wife, a mother, or someone who quietly maintained her household. Ryan continued, and although he seemed hesitant, there was a glimmer in his eyes that suggested something deeper. "I didn't mean to watch you, but I couldn't help it. You were different today." I laughed nervously, trying to brush off the compliments, but I could feel the atmosphere in the room shifting. It made me uncomfortable, but at the same time, there was a strange sense of excitement building inside me. I knew we were treading on dangerous ground. When Ryan finally stood to leave, the tension in the air was thick. He was visibly agitated, his movements jerky, as though something was pulling at him, but he wasn't sure what to do. Then, before I could react, he stepped closer and kissed me. It was sudden and unexpected, and for a moment, I froze, unsure of what to do. My lips parted slightly in shock, and before I knew it, I was swept up in the moment. I had never imagined anything like this would happen, but there I was, caught between the guilt that immediately washed over me and the undeniable spark of something new. I pulled away after a brief moment, my mind racing. What had I just done? Ryan's face mirrored the confusion I felt. He apologized repeatedly, backing away with his hands up, as though trying to undo the last few seconds. "I'm sorry, Jennifer. I don't know what came over me," he said, his voice shaky. "That was a mistake. I didn't know what to say." I stood there, my hand over my mouth, trying to process what had just happened. My heart was pounding, and a wave of emotions surged through me. Guilt, excitement, and disbelief collided in my mind. I felt torn between two worlds, one that was safe and familiar, and another that was unpredictable and dangerous. Ryan, seeing my hesitation, knelt down in front of me, his expression filled with remorse. "I don't know why I did that. Please forgive me. I don't want to make things awkward between us." His sincerity was evident, but it didn't make the situation any less complicated. In an effort to break the tension, I reached for a bracelet that was sitting on a nearby shelf. A bracelet I had since I was a child, a symbol of peace for me growing up. I handed it to him, hoping it would somehow act as a peace offering, a way to acknowledge that something had happened but that it didn't have to go any further. Ryan took the bracelet, and a small smile crossed his face, easing some of the tension. We both sat down on the couch, still reeling from what had just occurred. For a brief moment, everything around us seemed to fade away. The world outside didn't matter, and we were just two people caught up in something neither of us had expected. But then reality came crashing back. Ryan and I sat in silence, both trying to figure out what to do next. I knew this wasn't just a casual moment, and I felt a deep sense of guilt for allowing it to happen. Still, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that I had just experienced something significant, something that had stirred a long-dormant part of me. Ryan eventually stood up to leave, and I could see the confusion and regret in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Jennifer," he said again softly. "I shouldn't have kissed you." "I know," I replied quietly, still unsure of how to feel. "Let's just put this behind us." He nodded and walked toward the door. As he left, I felt an overwhelming sense that something had shifted, something inside me that I couldn't ignore. After Ryan left, the house seemed eerily quiet. The music that had once filled the room now seemed distant, like a faint echo of the joy and rhythm that had once been there. I sat on the couch, my thoughts swirling as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. The heat from Ryan's kiss still lingered on my lips, and guilt began to settle over me like a heavy blanket. How could I have let this happen? I looked around the room, searching for a sense of normalcy in the familiar surroundings, but everything seemed different. It was as if the world had tilted slightly, and nothing was quite the same. My mind raced, searching for reasons, excuses, something to explain away what had just transpired. Was it the heat of the day? The music? The loneliness? But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. What had happened with Ryan wasn't just a random, fleeting moment. There was something deeper at play, something that had been building slowly and had now come to the surface. And that realization terrified me. For a brief moment, I thought about telling my husband, Brian, but the very idea made me shudder. How could I explain the inexplicable? How could I reveal that in a moment of weakness, I had crossed a line I never thought I would? Telling him would destroy the trust we had built over the years, and I wasn't ready to face the consequences of that decision. The days that followed were a blur. I tried to bury myself in my daily routine, cleaning the house, taking care of the kids, pretending everything was normal. But inside, I was a mess. Every time I thought about that kiss, a mix of emotions would wash over me. Guilt, excitement, confusion. It was like an open wound that wouldn't heal, and I didn't know how to make it stop. I avoided Ryan as much as possible. Whenever he came over to visit Brian, I made sure to stay in the kitchen or find an excuse to leave the house. I couldn't face him. I couldn't deal with the emotions that surfaced every time I saw him. Ryan seemed to understand and kept a respectful distance, though I could still feel the tension between us. It was as if an invisible thread connected us, pulling us together even though we both knew it was wrong. Brian, completely unaware of the turmoil inside me, would casually mention Ryan in conversation. He'd talk about work, sports, or the latest thing they had laughed about. Every time he mentioned Ryan's name, my heart would race, and I'd have to work hard to keep my expression neutral. I couldn't let Brian see how much that one name affected me. As time went on, I started questioning myself even more. Was there something missing in my marriage that Ryan had awakened? I loved Brian, no doubt about that, but over the years, our life together had become predictable, mechanical. The routine of raising kids, running a household, and maintaining careers had taken its toll on us. We were comfortable, yes, but perhaps too comfortable. Had I become numb to the passion that had once been there? Ryan's unexpected kiss had stirred something in me, something I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just the kiss itself, it was the attention, the way he looked at me, the way he saw me in a way I hadn't been seen in years. It made me wonder if there was more to life than the safe, predictable routine I had grown so accustomed to. Despite all the confusion, I knew deep down that what had happened couldn't continue. I couldn't risk destroying my marriage, my family, for a moment of excitement. But the thought of going back to the monotony of my previous life was terrifying. Could I really just pretend like nothing had happened? Could I reconcile my feelings and move on without ever addressing them? One evening, while we were having dinner, Brian casually asked about Ryan. He mentioned that Ryan had seemed a little off lately, more distracted than usual. He told me he had a good time when he came over that day, Brian said, laughing. He even joked that he should stop by more often. You must have been great company. My heart skipped a beat. Just the sound of Ryan's name was enough to bring back all the emotions I had been trying to suppress. I forced a laugh, trying to play along, but inside, I was on edge. How could I possibly keep acting like everything was fine when my world had been turned upside down? After dinner, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't keep living like this, torn between guilt and desire, between the life I had built with Brian and the strange new emotions Ryan had awakened in me. I needed clarity. I needed to understand what had happened and why it had affected me so deeply. A few days later, I gathered my courage and decided to see Ryan. I knew it was risky, that I was playing with fire, but I couldn't help it. I needed answers, and I knew Ryan was the only one who could give them to me. I found him at Baker's Brew, a small, cozy coffee shop downtown where he often went on weekends. When he saw me, his eyes widened in surprise, but that familiar, slightly awkward smile quickly appeared on his face. We sat at a table in the corner, away from the other patrons. For a while, we sat in silence, both unsure of how to start the conversation. I nervously sipped my coffee, trying to find the right words. Finally, Ryan broke the silence. "Jennifer, are you okay?" His voice was soft, but there was genuine concern in his eyes. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts before speaking. "Ryan, we need to talk about what happened," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, as if he had been expecting this conversation all along. "I know it was unexpected," Ryan began, looking down at his hands. "And I'm really sorry. I wasn't trying to make things complicated. It just happened." Before he could continue, I interrupted him.
"No, Ryan.
"I'm not here to blame you. I need to understand what that kiss meant for you, and for me." I knew this was dangerous territory, but I had to know. The confusion had been eating away at me, and I needed clarity. Ryan paused for a moment, clearly struggling to find the right words. "To be honest, Jen, I've been thinking about you ever since that day. I didn't plan it, but I can't deny that I feel something. I don't know what it is exactly, but I can't stop thinking about you." His confession hit me like a wave, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I had suspected that Ryan felt something more, but hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way I hadn't been prepared for. "I've been thinking about it too," I admitted, my voice shaky. "But I won't destroy my family. I have a husband, children. I can't just throw all of that away for something I don't even fully understand." Ryan nodded again, his face filled with understanding. "I don't want to come between you and Brian. That's the last thing I want. But I can't deny how I feel, either." The weight of the situation hung heavy in the air between us. We both knew there was something real between us, but we also knew that pursuing it would have devastating consequences. I could feel the tension building, the unspoken acknowledgement that while something had sparked between us, we couldn't let it ignite any further. "We have to stop this," I finally said, my voice firm but tinged with sadness. "It's not fair to anyone, especially not Brian. We need to let it go before it gets out of hand." Ryan looked down at his coffee, clearly conflicted. "You're right. I know you're right, but it's going to be hard." "It will be," I agreed, "but it's the only way." We sat there for a few more minutes in silence, both of us lost in our thoughts. There was a sense of finality in the air, as if we both knew that this conversation was the beginning of the end. We couldn't go back to the way things were, but we also couldn't move forward into whatever this was. When I finally stood to leave, Ryan got up as well. "Take care, Jen," he said softly. "You too, Ryan," I replied, and with that, I walked out of the coffee shop, knowing that something had changed inside me forever. As I walked out of Baker's Brew, the cool air hit my face, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The tension that had been building inside me had finally found release, and though it didn't make everything better, it brought me a kind of peace. I knew now that what had happened with Ryan could never continue, and I had to focus on what truly mattered: my family, my marriage, my life with Brian. But that didn't mean it would be easy. Over the next few days, I threw myself into my daily routine, trying to suppress the emotions that still lingered just beneath the surface. Cleaning the house, taking care of the kids, smiling at Brian, pretending that everything was back to normal. It felt like a facade, one I was determined to maintain. Ryan and I didn't speak again after that meeting at the coffee shop, and he visited less frequently. When he did stop by, it was always when Brian was home, and I made sure to keep my distance. I could feel the tension between us, but we both knew it was better this way. We had crossed a line once, and there was no need to cross it again. Brian, of course, remained blissfully unaware of what had happened. I found myself studying him more closely, wondering if he had noticed the changes in me, the subtle shifts in my behavior. But if he had, he didn't say anything. He went about his life as usual, trusting me completely, and that trust weighed heavily on my conscience. As time passed, the intensity of the emotions I had felt with Ryan began to fade. The guilt, the excitement, the confusion, they all gradually dulled. like a wound that was slowly healing. But the memory of that kiss, of the way Ryan had looked at me, would always linger in the back of my mind. It was a moment that had changed me, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't erase it entirely. One evening, as I sat on the couch with Brian, watching TV, I realized that despite everything that had happened, I still loved him. I loved the life we had built together, the family we had created. And while the spark I had felt with Ryan had been thrilling, it wasn't real. What I had with Brian was real. It was steady, dependable, and rooted in years of shared experiences and love. In the end, I knew that the decision I had made was the right one. Some things are best left in the past. The kiss with Ryan, the emotions it had stirred, they were a reminder that I was still capable of feeling deeply, but they weren't worth losing everything I had. My marriage, my family, they were what truly mattered. As the weeks turned into months, life gradually returned to its normal rhythm. The episode with Ryan became a distant memory, something that had happened in another lifetime. But deep inside, I knew I had changed. I had learned something about myself that I hadn't known before. And though that part of me had been awakened briefly, I knew now that it was better to let it rest. Brian and I continued to build our life together, and though things weren't perfect, we worked hard to strengthen our bond. I focused on what truly mattered: our partnership, our family. And though I would always remember that sunny morning with Ryan, I had come to understand that some desires are best left unfulfilled. Thanks for watching. The next story is ready and just as thrilling. Subscribe to catch new stories every day.